Hello, everybody, and welcome to the live recording of the Young Screenwriters Podcast. We're going to get started in just a moment. I have my tea, and it is pouring rain outside for the third day in a row. Adam, is it raining there too?
On and off rain.
Really?
Yeah, not
Yeah,
that bad.
here it's been just like absolute torrential downpour, but it's kind of nice, I guess. Character building. Yeah. People have said like, "Oh, but we need it." And I'm just like, "Yes. We need it." But I don't know if I don't track how many inches of rain we get. I don't know if we need it.
I appreciate the negative ions of the rain and all that stuff.
I almost quoted a country music song to you, which you would definitely not get.
Over my head. That's unfortunately place that I know nothing of.
It's very, very optimistic. It's, rain makes corn and corn makes whiskey. And whiskey makes my baby feel a little frisky. So that is in the eloquent words of, I can't remember who, the benefit of rain.
I thought they were talking, they were going to go towards like the cycles of life where like the rain makes corn, the corn makes whiskey. The whiskey makes me cry, which is then absorbed into the,
okay.
And then it rains again. So like the tears are watering the corn. And so I'm drinking the whiskey.
So you're drinking your tears.
That makes me cry even more in like a cycle of endlessness.
I think you missed your calling as a country music star.
That's right. All right, let's get going.
All right, let's do this thing. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Young Screenwriters Podcast. I'm Alexie, and I'm here today with
Adam.
And so, exposition is in a lot of cases considered sort of the medicine of story. It's giving your audience what they need in order to get to what they want. But there's actually some ways to make it awesome, to make it really fun. And today we're going to talk about 3 of those ways. That is attacking with exposition. It's making your exposition a secret that must be earned. And the third way is don't give that information away. So we're going to talk about kind of like criteria for deciding when it's stuff you should keep to yourself. So to kick things off, Adam, what does it mean to attack with exposition?
So attacking with exposition is a term for when you need to introduce, exposition is information that you need the audience to understand to move forward with the story, like you mentioned before. But attacking with exposition is to make that information bad news for the characters, or bad in the sense of like it creates more conflict, or drama. So the example that I always use is at the beginning of Aliens, which is Alien 2 with Sigourney Weaver, James Cameron. Ripley, the main character, she wakes up after being in cryogenic sleep or whatever, after traveling through space. And when she wakes up, she's given the news that, hey, you've been asleep for hundreds of years. Like that's exposition, but it's exposition that's really bad news for the character. It's presented in kind of a dramatic situation. They're waking up. Like one really bad, clunky way to introduce that would have been having a title like graphic being 200 years later and she wakes up, right? Like that totally that's information that we'd be giving that removes the character's reaction to that information, right? So I think there's so many variations of this too. Like what are the different ways you can like imagine attacking with information in general?
So, I mean, some of it is just simply making it bad news. Some of it's literally attacking, right? I feel like that's what happens a lot of times in sci-fi or fantasy stuff. You literally attack with it. I think it was Game of Thrones that opens on the pilot opens, I believe, with like the White Walkers or the Whites or whatever they are chasing some random people, or like chasing some people from the wall who end up deserting. And then they run all the way back to the Starks and are like, winter is coming kind of a deal, you know? So that's a version where they have literally been attacked with the exposition. We don't just hear, oh man, there's a report that came in that said that there's some bad guys up in the north. It is, literally we see them attacking some dudes and then they run back and become a problem for the Starks, who now have to deal with these deserters and decide what to do with this information. So one version is literally attacking. And another way to put this is just like explosive turning points. So like explosive reveals or explosive reversals. Adam, do you have other ways that you think of attacking with exposition?
I like that idea of, it's framing it in the way of like, it's information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, these people are being attacked by these things, and that information, then they're not used to it, right? Like they don't know what this is. It's not normal to be attacked by White Walkers necessarily, right? If there's the version of that pilot where they don't show us that, they talk about the reports of it, and it's like the information is like embedded in dialogue. It's kind of an example of showing versus telling, right? Like, but this is a showing that creates problems for the characters in a dynamic way, right? Like, and this is kind of what I was thinking of this is like, there's a lot of variations of how you get information into the brains of people who are watching your thing, right?
Right.
You can make it, okay, this is a threat that the characters don't know about, but they need to know about. So we show the effects of the threat before we explain what it is. It's kind of what you were describing with the Game of Thrones, like, because they don't explain what this thing is. It's like a weird ice zombie, right?
Yeah.
We find out way later what that is and where they come from. That's kind of, they withhold that information. And I think that creates tension and it creates more suspense and intrigue. But if you make information bad news or a problem to solve, that often, and I think like the more maybe relatable version for people who are writing is sort of like, you need to present that protagonist Kyle is brothers.
Oh, Kyle.
Right. That they've
Kyle.
20 years. And the bad version is Kyle says, Gerald, we've been brothers for 20 years and you need to finally let me have the cookout at my house. Whatever. I don't know. Right. Like another way is, oh my God, Gerald, you burned down my house at the cookout, and mom's calling and she's yelling at you, right? Like mom's calling, she's yelling at you for burning her outhouse down during your last cookout. That's my place, right? Immediately we get the sense, somebody he's talking to, mom is mad for something wrong. Like it's immediately taking information and embedding it into conflict, right?
That's my favorite kind of exposition, though. It's like when the two siblings are standing there and they're like, how long have we been brothers? Our whole life, that whole, that's my favorite.
Or the robots took everything in the year of, Engaladu or something. And it's been really hard these last 6 summers since we are been enslaved by the robots, like just having characters talk like that, like, and that is an example of tell versus show. I think the difference between this and the traditional show versus tell is the idea that this information creates conflict between the characters, because you can tell someone bad news. That's not showing. Right. And I think that's the distinction I would make between this. So like, think about like, if you have to give us information about relationships, about timelines, about occupation, if you have to give us information about a person, think about how you can make it like bad news or conflict.
I mean, I think also a way to kind of distinguish this from show versus tell is that show doesn't always necessarily imply active. Like I'm picturing show as like that panning shot where you're sweeping over the mantle over the fireplace and there is the little folded up American flag next to an urn. And we see a picture of father and son standing next to each other, dad in a military uniform. And, then we see the kid just sitting there like, sad. And that's not telling us anything. It's showing us the whole thing, but it is nowhere near active. So attacking with exposition would be like the kid is yelling at someone like, I need, like, I have GI benefits, like that's supposed to pay for my school, kind of a thing, and someone being like, no, it's not, like, I don't know what to tell you, you're not going to get it, and like kind of introducing it in conflict when it's an active problem. But that's the classic thing that I think that we all kind of, when we start thinking about exposition, at least I do, you start with the slow pan over the mantle type of showing instead of telling. And then I think the next kind of evolution of that is, rather than making it a passive thing, make it explosive, like make it a problem that the protagonist has to deal with now, rather than even like in a flashback. Like, don't make it a flashback, make it now.
There is a time and a place for the earn shot, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like, what is this information that's going to be like essential to the relationships moving forward, or is this just a thing we need to know about this person before they enter the conflict? Like, for example,
Yeah.
it might be important that we'll go back to Kyle, that Kyle's dad is a veteran who died in the Korean War, whatever, that might be important information, but it's really about him and Gerald, and they're about to go on a road trip after a long time. And the news of the dad's death is old news, and showing the image, I think, because it's not going to be part of him and Gerald's relationship. Him and Gerald's problems should be present tense. But I think that's kind of how I would divide it. Like, the earn shot is past tense setup information that's showing, and relational things that are setting up what we're about to deal with often are better handled by that direct, like, hey, we're having a fight over the phone, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I don't want to do X, Y, and Z, etc.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. It's sort of like, how pertinent is this information to what's going to be happening next? And is it a problem right now? And there's times when the earn shot might fit your story better. I think that a lot of times, this is going to kind of get to a point that we talk about later, when you're choosing to include that information and it's not just set decoration. I think a lot of times you want to attack with it, but there is merit to thinking through the more subtle ways that you can introduce something.
Well, this kind of brings us into a second way you can handle exposition in a dynamic, interesting way. Making the information a secret that has to be earned by the characters. How would you sort of sketch that out in application, Alexie?
So essentially, the way that I think about that is, you have a backstory that is really, really important to the present, like in a very like interwoven way. And rather than giving it all up front, there's like two different approaches you can take with that, right? You can do like the bomb under the table, where you tell us what the problem is, and it's a bomb under the table. The audience is in on it the whole time. The character's in on it the whole time, and we're just waiting to see when it goes off. Or you can do sort of the mystery thing, where we don't know exactly what it is. We know something's wrong, and us and the character are being kept in suspense, sort of off balance, knowing that something is wrong that is going to come back. And so it becomes like a secret that the character has to that the protagonist has to earn.
Yeah.
One example that I think of when I think of that is Inception, with the whole backstory with Maul. Like the whole time, what's his face? Leo, Cobb. The whole time that Cobb is kind of going through this, we know that there's a problem with his ex-wife, or his wife, or Maul. We know that there's a problem there, and we don't know what it is. And we get this kind of like dripped in throughout, until you have that really explosive moment when he goes down the elevator and sees her in like the hotel room or whatever it is, and we finally understand, like, okay, this is what happened between them. But that's something that we've been building to for a long time. Is that kind of how you think about it, or
that's one way to think of it. I think there are like the last example, I think there are a few ways to think about, like, when you're thinking of exposition, it's like there's the raw information that they just need to know, right? And it's like you said, it's medicine often in terms of like it's considered like the medicine the audience needs to like get the good stuff, right? And I like this framing of the secret it must be earned. The way I'm seeing it, which I think is totally compatible with that way, is that there's a cost to the information to the characters, right? And like kind of just framing it that way, like, okay, you needed to learn about what really happened between Gerald and the mom all those years ago that Kyle doesn't know, like why doesn't Gerald and mom talk? Why don't they talk anymore? That's the thing. And he maybe sells his car to their second cousin and has to do a really annoying thing for them for the cousin to like find out, right? Like they're like, he went through something to get the information. The audience is a lot less like annoyed to get a down low because you've been presenting the gap of information. Like we know there's something that we don't know and there's a cost to the character. That's kind of how I see like one way of presenting that, being like, okay, it's kind of similar to the bottom end of the table in the sense of the audience knows. Well, the difference is the bottom end of the table, you presented information that the character doesn't know, but you know. And this is kind of an inverse of that, where you're presenting the gap of information as like, hey, something happened.
I have a question for you about this. So say you're writing your story and you decide that you're going to go with this sort of, make it a secret that must be earned technique. And then you present the gap of information, you're writing to it. And then you want to have the moment like where you're going to reveal what it is. How can you make sure that it's actually satisfying at that moment? Like what needs to be true of that secret or that exposition in order for it to feel like a satisfying reveal?
Yeah, it has to be worth it, right? Like,
yeah,
it has to be worth the journey, right? Like, it can't be irrelevant first. And it has to be something that is a game changer for the relationship. So, like, it has to make sense. Like, oh, I understand. Like, in this example with Gerald and the mom, and Kyle needs to know what happened between them, that they don't talk anymore. When he finds out what it is, oh, it has to make sense. It has to be like, oh, I wouldn't talk to you either if that happened 20 years ago. Like it has to be proportional to what we've been building up to be. And it has to feel connected to the story overall. Like this has to be this type of thing is a major plot point, right? And this is obviously, I mean, maybe not like what the whole movie's about, but like if you presented this kind of information gap, the information has to deliver and it has to be important to the story. I don't know if that's really answering that question, but
no, it does. And I think the thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is that it also kind of needs to, I think, curious if you agree, I think it kind of needs to be unexpected or in some way surprising. It can't just be like, oh, they're like the main character, your protagonist, Kyle, might think that Gerald stole money from the mom. And that might be like strongly implied that Kyle thinks that Gerald stole money from the mom. And then when you finally get there, you find out, no, like the mom is the bad guy. The mom had been like scamming Gerald for all these years and Gerald finally got sick of it. Like it has to be a reversal. Yeah.
The dad didn't die in Korea.
Oh my God. He's been there the whole time.
No, he's dead. But the mom pulled the plug on him in the hospital.
And Gerald, what was Gerald doing? Gerald stole the money, but
Gerald was 9 years old and he saw it. Like that's a secret.
Yeah.
That's a dramatic, juicy. But that's like the whole movie would be about that information. Like I think that's like the large scale. Like, whoa, this is almost like a mystery framing. I think there's a way smaller. Like we're presenting this talk as exposition tricks to like get necessary and mundane information. Like you can do the like really the one scene version of this where, like for example, it could be just one conversation. We need to understand that the car is old or something. Like the car that Kyle is about to ride for the road trip is really old and kind of suspect. We're planting that information for the audience. And rather than having somebody say, wow, that car is really old, might not make it through the trip. There's the earn shot version where we show like something's wrong with the engine. Or there's like he's haggling for here's the version where he's buying this used car. He only has like $150 and he needs a car to get from point A to point B. And maybe he barters and trades something to get it there. So the idea like the information that the car is not very good could come from like the dealer being like, are you sure you want it?
Yeah, exactly. It's sort
It's
of
the
like
only one I have, right? And that way we have information that that car is suspicious. It's probably going to break down later without it feeling like we were told that.
Yeah.
Because the character bartered for it because they had no other options.
Yeah, it would be kind of like the guy is like, are you sure that one? And the guy's like, no, I gotta go. Give it to me now. And then you're waiting to figure out what that one was, like what the problem was with that one. Another way that I see this really casually often is I've been watching Suits constantly.
Oh,
And
good.
yeah, it's great. If you are unfamiliar with it, it's basically like it's a show about like lawyers who are solving cases for their firm essentially. And so a lot of it is information discovery and like twists and turns and reversals. And so it'll be something like, what does this person have on this person? There's some secret that they're using against them because otherwise they would never side with this person in this deal. And so then you have to go digging for that information. And it's not necessarily like the season arc. It's like a beat in the episode of being like, oh, I found it out. He caught them in the affair. It's like, it's just like little things like that where they say, we're missing this gap. We need those emails. Like, what's in those emails? And then you kind of fill it in. But I guess that kind of leads us to our last point though that I wanted to ask to bring up, which is our don't suggestion, which is really more about like when you're thinking about exposition, you're thinking about what you're going to put in, being discerning about the kind of stuff that actually needs to be in your movie or your show. So what's kind of the criteria that you use to determine, does this really need to end up in the audience facing version of the story?
I would say this context is more of an editorial thing where I would be like, after I've written it, I think it's a good question to ask yourself if a scene seems exposition heavy, maybe ask yourself, do we need this to be said?
Yeah.
Like, do we need to know about, for example, bringing back our Gerald, Kyle, and the mom and the dead dad. Do we need to know the dad's dead?
Yeah.
There's a version where we omit where it's sort of like it's a void in the movie, being like, okay, but where's their dad? What's the deal with that? You withhold that information rather than giving up front.
Like every Disney show. Like every Disney show with a missing parent. You're like, what happened to them? Oh.
Beauty and the Beast. Where's the mom?
Who knows? Gone.
She's
probably
adopted. She's adopted.
That would do it.
That's my
by books. Yeah.
But I like the idea of like, if you have a scene that feels clunky and you're like, oh God, they're talking about history and backstory, almost always like it's backstory that we need to explain for understanding, right? Like, I think sometimes maybe this note is about examine the information and like question if it's necessary, because we might assume it's important for them to know about the dead dad because it's something that happened between the characters, but it might create more conflict to talk around it.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes, because I'm someone who absolutely loves like world building and coming up with all these details, I kind of think of it as like you have this whole like map or like this whole tapestry of everything that you have woven together about this world. And then necessarily you are only showing us a small section of that tapestry. That doesn't mean that the other stuff isn't holding together the big picture, that you didn't come up with all these different pieces that justify and make what's happening in our actual story cohesive, but you aren't necessarily going to be sharing every single thing that you found until the point that you get really famous and you release your book that's like all the details you've ever written on this world ever, which is definitely something I think about. But
listen, you're Silmarillion. Right.
Yeah. I want it.
It's a good book. It's not a good book. Like, it's not even, it's just lore.
Yeah. And some people really like it. When you get to that point where you've earned it, you say, here is my tapestry. And some nerds will love it.
Mildly interesting at best. But like, I'm one of those people like, I mean, lore is interesting sometimes if you're invested, right? But I have to be really invested to care about lore. Like, the bar is so high. Like, I have to have already been like in the sauce. Like, you got to win me over. Like if it's just the first time I'm introduced to like a show or a movie or a franchise or whatever, I'm just not interested in the lore. Like
Do
you got
you
to give me a good story. That's just my
do you,
preference.
do you come up with more lore than you share in your worlds, or is it normally not?
That's not how I write. I'm an
Mhm.
underwriter in general. Like I very much like am not excited by the thing outside the frame.
Mm.
So and I think we're very different in that respect. Like I don't world building for me is like a necessary evil to make something happen and work. It's not something that I like do to like I would never build a world and then like construct a story out of it. For me, I would construct the story and the world is necessary to hold it.
Then I guess your version of losing lore is so you would be writing an earlier draft and realize I have to cut the scene where we learn what happened to the grandpa because it's not relevant, right?
That's
Like
right.
that kind of a thing.
It would be about the story at the end of the day, right? Like,
Yeah.
But for you, because you do a lot of fantasy sci-fi stuff, I would imagine you might have like a situation where like, do I need to explore it? Do I need to explain how the magic doors work?
Oh my god. Oh, yeah, that's exactly the kind of stuff that happened. It like I'll also be like, I'm writing a story about like this time machine and she has to fix it. And then I'm like, how much do I have to explain about how she fixed it? And then you get stuck in this like fake technology world, like where you're like, what could reasonably be broken that she could fix? And I'm like, I don't have to say that. I just have to write she fixes it and move on. But I have to constantly remind myself I don't need to say like it's like exposition dump, you know? Like I don't need to say exactly what she needs to do in order to fix this thing. She just needs to fix it after I convince the audience that she's a person who can fix it.
Unless it's information that's really important to understanding the world
Flux
and
capacitor.
information, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like if it's a story, like because also I'll make just to do a devil's advocate for a moment. Like I think there's a time and a place for showing how things work,
True.
right? There's a great short story by Stephen King. It's one of my favorite. It's horrifying. I'm going to spoil it. It's called The Jaunt. It is all about the invention of teleportation technology in 30 years in the future. And it's about a dad and his kids. They are going to do their jaunt for the first time. So it's instantaneous transportation from Earth to Mars, but you can set up a jaunt anywhere. But it's basically like an airport terminal, and they have gas masks and they're putting everybody to sleep. And the kids, Exposition, are asking questions. Dad, tell us about the jaunt? And he's telling them the story of how the inventor created the jaunt for the first time. And it intercuts between this scene where you're like, oh, this is a relatable family scene of kids are going on an airplane with dad and mom for the first time, and dad's explaining airplanes and that they're safe and don't worry about them. And then we intercut to the inventor of the jaunt who creates a portal accidentally. In this world, gas shortages, gas has stopped flowing, so energy is really precious, right? So this is a world where the jaunt is necessary. See, that's background information that is useful. It's not just irrelevant, but in the invention, they spend time talking about how he invented it and like how he creates the small portal. He like, is it real? It's like you're creating the discovery, and he puts a pencil through and it comes out on the other side of the wall. And he's like, wait, is this for real? And then he starts putting all these things into the hole and it's coming out. And then he puts a body part through and his hand comes through. I'm nervous. Seems okay. I'm going to put a mouse through. I need to know if it's safe. Puts the mouse through the butt, through its back, legs. It seems fine. You put the mouse through its right foot. You put the mouse's head through and back, and it's lifeless. It's alive, but it's like zoned out white eyes, ages, and then it dies. Wait, every time I put its head through, but every other body part is absolutely fine, as if nothing happened. A pencil, totally fine. And so what happened is they discover that when he puts the mice asleep, they go through and they wake up absolutely fine. But if the mouse is awake when its brain goes through the portal, it's like lifeless and then dies. And then they jump forward in time to the human experiments, and they find out that human prisoners, if you put a human being through, basically you live an eternity of time. But if you're asleep, you just go through. So the whole thing back at the airport, the kid is like he doesn't get to the end of the story because he doesn't want to scare the kid. And the kid, when they put the gas mask on, holds his breath and doesn't go to sleep.
Ew,
Ours,
no.
the kid has an ageless thing, like his kid's hair's gone white, and he says it becomes an it, and the dad wakes up and he hears the screams, and he sees this thing, and the kid starts screaming, "Longer than you think, Dad! Longer than you think!" And that's how the story ends. But like,
Good
there's a lot
Lord.
of background information to get to that release, right? Like, we showed the invention, we showed the political context of the inventor and how prisoners work, and this is all a 30-page story. A lot of lore and information.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, like one of my favorite parts of movies is like the scene in Black Panther where Shuri is showing him like, look at this. I made you these outfits. Go punch this thing, and then it punches you back. Or like, the spies are like, here's the pen you get to use, but oh, let me take off the top, and it is a little microphone. That was always my favorite moment, especially as a kid in any show. I was like, yes, I want the stuff. Like that is the best part. And so I think you're right that there is a time and place for explaining how things work. And it depends on, I think in all those cases, it's building up to a use case later.
Yes,
Like,
that's
and that's
exactly
kind
right.
of the point. So if it's just like this is how it works because you have to fix it and then we move on, then probably not worth it. But if it's like this is going to be a thing that really matters a little bit down the road, then that's when it becomes good to break down.
And just to bring
all
up
the
this
details.
example that comic Jim just made, which is Inception, does a lot of explain how the magic door opens type of exposition. Yes, because us understanding how the magic door in a movie about opening and closing magic doors, it's important to know how magic doors open and close, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like Inception's a really good example of dense exposition movie. Like, there's so many, and they do so many like tricks. Some of them work, some of them don't. There's some clunky scenes where they're talking, just telling us things, but there's some good scenes where like, okay, we've got a joke. Okay, we have background drama between the dad and the father-in-law and the son, or we have, a character needs information that the other character has, and they're asking questions, like Elliot Page's character is always asking questions because they are the audience proxy and don't
Right.
know what Cobb is saying, right? So like there are a lot of tricks in that movie to explain how magic doors open and close, but by the second half of the movie, they've stopped explaining stuff, right? Like we know enough for the it's like kind of climbing up, taking your medicine, and then the slide down is the fun
Yeah.
part.
And in Inception, I think like one of the most important things that they do is they are kind of intercutting and telling you the information that you need to know right before when you need to know it, for the most part. Like
When they have that really clunky chase scene in Mombasa for no reason, and I like remember it was like him, he's trying to recruit Tom Hardy, and the guys from his old employers from his last job are hunting him. They've got to like escape, and it's like that chase had nothing to do with the movie. It was just a chase because they needed some action in Act 1, or
you got to attack with
Act 2.
it.
Yeah.
That's like, I think that's an example of not quite attacking with exposition. It's sort of like attacking while you give exposition, which is not the same thing.
It was an
But
arbitrary chase scene in the
yeah,
middle. And of course, it was the classic Orientalist, like running through the market and knocking people's baskets over.
the fruit stand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in Africa, and he's knocking over fruit stands. And look, it was
Yeah.
stupid. Great movie, but that scene was stupid.
Yeah, it is.
To recap some of this, attack with exposition, make information a secret that has to be earned or possibly have a cost to, whether it's a small conversation or a big reveal, and have the judgment to not share things. Ask yourself, do I need to explain how this magic door works? I like that metaphor. Because in a movie about magic doors, yeah, explaining how magic doors work is part of the fun. In a movie where, we're just in the future and whatever, you don't need to tell us. They open. It's magic. We're in the future, right? Like, it depends on what the promise of the story is.
And you can put it all in your personal journal and keep it all for yourself if you love it.
That's
right. And share it when your whole story goes viral and everyone wants to know all the details. But yeah, and if you like the way that we kind of talk about this, we also talk a lot about how to kind of give information out in one of our free courses, Writing the Scene. So we hope that you'll check that out. You can find that at youngscreenwriters.com. We have like a course drop down. Writing the scene is free. And you can go in there and see some tips on how to lay out your scenes, how to give information in a concise and interesting way.
Fantastic.
So, thank you so much for joining us today, everybody. And we'll see you next time.